That night seemed to be like any other, until my instincts warned me. The message on her phone, which simply said, "Don't be late," accompanied by a smile I had never seen in her eyes when she looked at me, was the trigger. I decided to follow her. She left the house elegantly, wearing a dress she hadn't worn for me in a long time, perfumed in a way I had already forgotten. My heart was beating fast, not from jealousy, but from the strange feeling that something was wrong. When I stopped the car in front of the restaurant, I was still trying to find excuses for what was happening. Maybe it was a work meeting, maybe a longtime friend. But then I saw her, sitting at the table, laughing with another man. A man I had never seen before. My hands were sweaty as I walked across the room, feeling the curious stares of the other customers. My world seemed to collapse with every step, but I didn't hesitate. I stopped in front of them, and my voice echoed like thunder, "What is happening here? Who is this man who is having dinner with you?" The entire table stopped. She turned pale, and the man just stared at the ground, uncomfortable, but not surprised. It was at that moment that I realized that I wasn't the only one she owed explanations to. "It's not what it seems," she started to say, but her voice was shaking as much as the hands she was trying to hide under the table. The man finally looked up and said calmly, "I think you deserve to know the truth." My stomach dropped at those words, as if they carried the weight of something much greater than I could imagine. "Really?" I asked, feeling the bitter taste of betrayal forming before I even heard the answer. "Yes," he continued, "but perhaps she shouldn't be the one to tell." And then he started talking. The story unfolding before me was like a punch in the gut. It wasn't just a case. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a lie built on a past I didn't even know existed. A secret so deep that it seemed impossible that she had carried it all this time without me suspecting it. She cried in silence, but I felt no mercy. I felt anger, pain, and a growing need for answers. Every word from that man seemed to hit me like a blade, cutting through everything I believed to be real in our relationship. He revealed details she had never mentioned, things that should have been impossible for an outsider to know. It was as if he was stripping me of the last bit of dignity I had at that table. "Why did you do that?" I asked, staring at her, trying to find any trace of the woman I loved. But she couldn't face me. He just mumbled rambling apologies, while he seemed comfortable with the chaos he had caused. "It was a mistake," she muttered. "But how can something like this be called an error? Errors are carelessness, accidents. This was a choice, repeated enough times to destroy everything we had built together." The man looked at me one last time before getting up. "I hope you find the peace she never gave me," he said, as if that would comfort me. He left the restaurant, and I stood there, looking at her, at the emptiness that now filled the space between us. "I can explain," she tried again, but I no longer knew if I wanted to hear it. What else was there to say? As we left the restaurant, the rain began to fall, each drop feeling like a cruel reminder of the mess my life had become. But something inside me said that that wouldn't be the last revelation that night. Something told me that what I had just discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. I needed to know. I needed to understand how far the lies went, how far she was willing to destroy everything. And most importantly, how far would I be willing to go to do justice, to find an end to this story that seemed endless. Welcome to our channel. Here, we never support any form of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictions created to show the devastating impact betrayal can have on people's lives, teaching lessons about choices, trust, and consequences. Get ready, because now you're about to dive into a shocking narrative full of twists and turns. Good story, and stay tuned, nothing will be as you imagine. Ethan and Olivia's life seemed a reflection of stability. They had been married for over 15 years, and even with the challenges of everyday life, they always found ways to support each other. Ethan was a man of routine, dedicated to his work as a manager at a logistics company. His commitment to his job was undeniable, but it often meant overtime and sleepless nights, which he justified as a way of ensuring comfort for his family. Olivia, on the other hand, was a woman with a vibrant personality and a knack for connecting with people. Working as an event organizer, she was always surrounded by new people and exciting stories, which often contrasted with her husband's pragmatism. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, in a cozy house that bore the marks of time and the life they shared. Every detail of that house seemed to tell a story. The worn-out couch in the living room had witnessed family movie nights, laughter, and even some more heated arguments. The dining table, with its scratched surface, was the place where they celebrated small and large achievements, as well as moments of silent reflection. For Ethan, that house represented security; for Olivia, a base from which she could explore the world without ever feeling lost. Despite the appearance of a solid marriage, small voids began to emerge in the cracks of coexistence. Ethan, often absorbed by the demands of his work, had difficulty understanding his wife's emotional needs. Olivia, who had always been understanding, began to feel a growing weight in her husband's emotional absence. She loved Ethan, but the monotony that slowly settled into the relationship began to weigh more than she expected. She filled these spaces with the events she organized, dedicating herself intensely to the details, as if each event was an attempt to escape the apathy that threatened to engulf her. Weekends used to be the time they tried to reconnect. Ethan enjoyed making breakfast for both of them, a tradition he had maintained since their early years of marriage. Sitting at the table, they discussed trivial matters and made plans that rarely came to fruition. Olivia was smiling, but deep down, she felt that Ethan's gestures, although sincere, lacked the depth she desired. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on opposite sides of an invisible glass, where they could see each other but not truly touch each other. Olivia's friends often noticed her energy when she talked about her projects. She glowed as she described the flowers she had chosen for a wedding or the lights she had strung for an outdoor party. But when the subject returned to domestic life, his eyes lost some of their shine. "Ethan is a good man," she said over and over, as if she needed to convince herself of that. It was true. He was trustworthy, hardworking, and clearly loved her. But something deeper seemed to be missing, something she still couldn't name. Ethan, on the other hand, was proud of Olivia. He often spoke of her to his colleagues, praising her talent and dedication. For him, Olivia was the heart of the house, the person who kept everything in balance while he dealt with the chaos of work. But there were times when he felt a distance between them, a disconnect he didn't know how to repair. He thought it was a phase, something that would be overcome with time. Maybe a vacation together would do the trick. Perhaps a promotion at work would bring more stability and, consequently, more time for her. The two had a daughter, Sophie, aged 12, who was the center of their attention. She was a curious girl, with eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. Ethan saw Sophie as an extension of Olivia, full of life and energy. Olivia saw in Sophie a reflection of her father's sense of responsibility, something that made her proud and worried at the same time. Sophie's presence often served as a bridge between the two. On nights when Ethan arrived early, the three of them would watch TV shows together, sharing laughter that, for brief moments, made everything seem normal. As the years went by, the difference in the way each person dealt with life's challenges began to become more evident. Ethan sought to solve problems in practical ways, while Olivia craved deep, meaningful conversations. It was like she was screaming for something more, but he wasn't listening, or maybe he didn't know how to respond. He thought his actions, paying the bills, planning home improvements, were clear demonstrations of love. For her, however, tangible gestures were not enough. She wanted presence, she wanted to be seen. One day, while organizing a large corporate event, Olivia met people who sparked memories of who she used to be. Between laughter and conversations, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, lightness. Meanwhile, Ethan was facing a particularly difficult week at work. Pressured by deadlines and goals, he began to notice that his energy was running out. He wanted to be the man Olivia deserved, but he felt that, every day, it became more difficult to reconcile everything. Small cracks in the marriage began to widen. Olivia started spending more time away from home, justifying herself with new projects and commitments. Ethan noticed, but preferred not to confront her. He believed his absence was temporary, something that would pass once things stabilized. He ignored the obvious signs because facing the truth seemed scarier than continuing to live in the comfort of his denial. Life continued at this dissonant pace, with both of them trapped in their own bubbles of loneliness. Olivia, despite all her efforts to appear strong, felt increasingly confused. She loved Ethan, but she didn't know if that was still enough. Ethan, in turn, was beginning to wonder if he really knew the woman he had shared so many years with. But he preferred to believe that everything would be fine, because to accept otherwise would be to recognize how much they had lost each other. The foundations were laid, tensions were silently accumulating, and destiny seemed to prepare something inevitable for both of them. And as the silence between them grew, something much bigger was about to happen, something that would forever change the dynamics of that marriage that, to the outside world, still seemed so perfect. The days seemed to follow an automatic rhythm, as if Ethan and Olivia had become accustomed to living with the distance that separated them. He immersed himself in his work even more, trying to ignore the persistent nagging that something was out of place. Olivia, for her part, seemed to find a new kind of energy in her activities. It was as if she had discovered something that renewed her spirits, something she didn't share with him. Ethan noticed the changes, but chose not to confront them. It was easier to think it was a phase, a temporary imbalance that would soon be corrected. One night, returning home, Ethan found Olivia on the phone. Her voice sounded soft, almost intimate, as she laughed at something the other person said. Upon noticing his presence, she quickly ended the connection, throwing him a casual smile. Ethan didn't comment, but it stuck in his mind. Who would be on the other end of the line? He tried to convince himself that she was just a friend or colleague, but doubt began to creep in, becoming a constant companion. In the days that followed, he began to notice small details that might have previously gone unnoticed. Olivia always seemed to be in a hurry, leaving the house earlier than usual and returning later. There was a lightness in her step, a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years. For anyone else, that would be a sign of happiness. For Ethan, it was a red flag. He couldn't understand why, but he felt something was off. One afternoon, while organizing papers on his desk, Ethan found a receipt from a restaurant he didn't recognize. The date marked a night that Olivia had said she was in a work meeting. He held the paper for a moment, feeling the weight of what it could mean. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the feeling of discomfort consumed him. He decided to keep it, thinking it might just be a coincidence. However, the doubt continued to grow, fueled by the small details that accumulated day after day. Olivia, on the other hand, was struggling with her own feelings. There was something she was hiding, something that made her feel alive and guilty at the same time. She convinced herself that she deserved a little happiness, something that would take her away from the suffocating monotony she felt in her marriage. But at the same time, I knew I was crossing a line from which there was no return. In quiet moments, she wondered if she was prepared to face the consequences of her choices. But a message or a phone call was enough for her to ignore these reflections and let herself be carried away by the euphoria of the moment. One night, Ethan noticed that Olivia was taking longer than usual to respond to his messages. He knew she was at an event, but something felt wrong. When she finally returned home, she was distracted, almost absent. He tried to talk, but her answers were vague, as if her mind was somewhere else. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He began to wonder if he was being paranoid or if there was actually something going on. Days later, he decided to follow Olivia. It wasn't something he was proud of doing, but the need for answers was stronger than his guilt. He saw her leave the house, well-groomed, with an expression that mixed anxiety and enthusiasm. Ethan discreetly followed her to a restaurant downtown. He parked the car at a safe distance and watched as she entered the premises. The feeling of discomfort in his chest grew by the minute. From his position, he had a partial view of the restaurant's interior. It was then that he saw her sitting at a table, laughing and talking to a man he didn't know. Ethan felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The doubts that had tormented him for weeks were now painfully confirmed. He stayed there, in the car, watching the scene as if he were trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. For a moment, he considered simply leaving, pretending he hadn't seen anything. But I knew that was impossible. Overcome by a mixture of anger, pain and determination, Ethan got out of the car and entered the restaurant. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if he was about to cross a barrier of no return. He stopped in front of the table where Olivia was. The smile on her face instantly disappeared upon seeing him. The man looked at Ethan with an expression of surprise and discomfort, but said nothing. Ethan stared at Olivia, waiting for her to say something, but her silence was deafening. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice filled with a pain he couldn't disguise. "Who is this man?" Olivia tried to stammer out a response, but the words seemed to escape her lips. The man, however, seemed calmer than Ethan expected. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and looked directly at Ethan. "Maybe you should ask her," he said, before leaving the table and disappearing into the restaurant. Ethan remained still, looking at Olivia, waiting for her to say something, anything that would explain what he had just witnessed. But all he saw was the reflection of his own pain in her eyes. Without another word, he turned and left the restaurant, leaving Olivia alone with the weight of his betrayal. As he walked back to his car, the only thing that occupied his mind was the need for answers. He knew that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Something he was determined to discover, regardless of the cost. Ethan couldn't remember the way home that night. Everything seemed shrouded in a dense fog of confusion, pain and anger. Every second of what he had witnessed in the restaurant repeated in his mind like an incessant echo, stripping him of any trace of sanity. He tried to concentrate on driving, but the image of Olivia with that man remained like an open wound. When he got home, he sat on the couch, holding his head in his hands, trying to make sense of the chaos that had become his life. The hours dragged by until Olivia walked through the door, her face haggard and her eyes red. She hesitated for a moment before taking the first step towards Ethan. He didn't look up immediately, but the tension in the room was palpable. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice low but charged with emotion. "Who was he?" he asked, without looking away from the ground. Olivia took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to speak, but hesitated again. "You wouldn't understand," she said finally, and those words, more than anything else, sparked something in Ethan. He stood up abruptly, forcing Olivia to take a step back. "Wouldn't I understand?" he repeated, incredulity permeating every word. "I spent 15 years of my life believing in you, trusting you, building a life with you. And now you tell me I wouldn't understand? Then explain. Make me understand." Olivia stared at him, trying to maintain her composure, but tears began to stream down her face. "It's not that simple, Ethan," she began, but he interrupted her. "Yes, it is. It's simple when you decide to destroy everything we've built without even giving me the chance to fight for it." The room seemed too small to contain all the tension between them. Olivia took a few steps back and sat in the nearest chair, crossing her arms as if she was trying to protect herself. He's someone from my past," he finally said, his voice barely audible. Ethan frowned, his confusion mixing with his anger. "Your past?" he asked. "You always told me that your past didn't matter, that what mattered was the present, it was what we had. What changed?" Olivia didn't respond immediately. Instead, he lowered his head, as if searching for the right words. "He's not just someone from my past," she said finally, her voice shaking. He's my half-brother." Those words echoed in the room like thunder. Ethan was silent for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. "What?" he asked, in disbelief. I don't understand. How is this possible?" Olivia took another deep breath, trying to stay calm, but her entire body was shaking. My mother, she was in a relationship before she met my father. I discovered this a few years ago, but never knew it was so close. He showed up a few months ago, and, her voice trailed off, and she brought her hand to her face, trying to hold back the tears. And you decided that the best place to resolve this would be in secret, behind my back, in a restaurant? Ethan asked, his voice filled with irony and pain. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Olivia replied, her voice desperate. I just wanted to get to know him, understand who he was, but things got out of hand. I knew I should have told you, but I was scared. Scared of how you would react, scared of what this could mean for us. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. Were you scared? You were afraid that I wouldn't understand, but you decided to betray me like this? This isn't about fear, Olivia. This is about choices. And you chose to lie. Olivia stood up, crossing the room until she was in front of Ethan. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, but he took a step back, as if her words were something physical he needed to avoid. But you hurt, he replied. You hurt me in ways I didn't even know were possible. And now you want me to just understand. Olivia started crying again, but Ethan didn't move. He felt like he was looking at a stranger, someone he no longer recognized. The silence that followed was broken only by Olivia's sobs. Ethan ran his hands over his face, trying to find some shred of clarity amidst the chaos. Finally, he sighed and said, I need to get out of here. Olivia looked at him, surprised and scared. Ethan, please don't. We can talk, we can work this out, she begged, but he was already grabbing his keys and walking towards the door. Talking won't fix this, he said before leaving Olivia alone with the weight of her choices. Ethan drove aimlessly for hours, trying to process everything that had happened. Olivia's words echoed in her mind, each one bringing more questions than answers. How could she hide something like that from him? And why did she think she could solve this alone? He knew things would never be the same, but he didn't know what to do with this new reality. All he knew was that he needed time to understand what came next. And all the while, the consequences of Olivia's secret began to unfold in ways neither of them could have predicted. Ethan drove without a clear destination, the dark streets reflecting the chaos that was taking place in his mind. The muffled sound of tires on asphalt was the only noise other than his heavy breathing. He parked at a park he used to visit with Olivia and Sophie on the weekends, now deserted and silent in the dim streetlights. Sitting in the car seat, he lost himself in his thoughts, trying to make some sense of what he had discovered. The weight of betrayal, secret, omission, everything was mixed in a storm of emotions. What was real about what they shared? What had been just a facade? Hours passed, and he finally decided to return home. But not to confront her again, not to seek answers. He needed a plan, he needed to understand how to deal with this. When he entered the door, he found Olivia sitting on the couch, her face still streaked with tears. She looked up at him but didn't say anything right away. He passed her, walking to the kitchen, where he grabbed a glass of water and stood there, staring into space. I want to know everything, he finally said, his voice firm but low, as if he was holding on to the last ounce of strength he had left. Olivia slowly stood up and walked over to him, but kept a respectful distance. Ethan, she began, but he interrupted her, raising his hand. No excuses, no fuss. Just the truth. All. Now. Olivia nodded, visibly nervous. She pulled out a chair and sat down, as if she needed something to anchor her as she unearthed what felt like an unbearable weight. When I was 20, my mother told me about him, he began, choosing each word carefully. She said that before she met my father, she had a relationship with another man. A brief relationship, but one that changed everything. She found out she was pregnant shortly before they broke up. My father never knew. He took responsibility for me from day one, and she swore she would bury that part of the past. Ethan watched her, his eyes fixed on her every move, trying to decipher what was yet to come. Olivia took a deep breath before continuing. A few months ago, he found me. I don't know how, but he did it. He said he knew who I was and that he wanted to get to know me. At first, I resisted. But, over time, curiosity grew stronger. I didn't know what to expect. I just wanted to understand this part of my story that my mother always hid from me. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, feeling a wave of frustration and anger wash over him again. And you thought hiding this from me was the best idea? He asked, his voice thick with disbelief. You decided to deal with this alone, without including me, without even giving me the chance to be by your side. Olivia lowered her head, embarrassed. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought it was something I needed to resolve on my own before bringing it into our lives. But then things got complicated. Ethan crossed his arms, waiting for her to continue. He started to appear more. I wanted to know about myself, about our family. I thought I could control it, but it became increasingly difficult. Ethan laughed, but not in humor, but in pure disbelief. Complicated? Difficult? Olivia, you crossed a line you never should have crossed. This isn't about him, this isn't about his mother's past. It's about you. You chose to lie, to hide, and now we are here. She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. I know I made a mistake. I know I screwed up. But it's not like you're thinking. He's not, we're not, I didn't betray you like that. Ethan fell silent, his words hanging heavy in the air. He didn't know if he could believe her, he didn't know what was true and what was just another attempt to soften the situation. Olivia stood up, going towards him, but stopped a few steps away, hesitant. I know you don't trust me anymore, and I don't expect you to. But please believe that I never wanted to hurt you. I got lost in all of this. I don't know how to fix it. Ethan watched her for a long moment before taking a step back. I need time, Olivia. Time to understand what this means, time to decide what I want to do with it all. Because right now, all I feel is that the woman I loved is no more. Olivia started crying again, but Ethan did nothing to comfort her. He turned and left the room, leaving her alone with her tears and regrets. He went up the stairs, entered the room and closed the door. Inside, he sat on the bed, feeling the crushing weight of everything that had happened. He knew this story was far from over, but for now, he needed silence. I needed distance. And, above all, I needed answers that only time could bring. Ethan spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling of his room as if he expected the answers to be written there. The silence in the house was suffocating, interrupted only by Olivia's slow footsteps that seemed to echo like a constant reminder of everything that had happened. He knew he couldn't stay in that bed. He got up, walked to the window and watched the distant lights, as if the glow of the streets could bring some kind of clarity. But nothing made sense. He felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and most of all, a sense of betrayal that seemed to eat away at every part of him. It wasn't just about the secret or the man she had met. It was about her choice to keep him in the dark, to carry a burden alone when they should share everything. Downstairs, Olivia remained on the couch, her arms crossed around herself as if that could protect her from the whirlwind of emotions that overwhelmed her. She knew there wasn't enough justification for what she had done, but she couldn't help but wonder if Ethan would ever be able to forgive her. It was a thought that haunted her, because deep down, she knew the answer was uncertain. She had crossed a line, and Ethan wasn't the type to forget easily. As the sun began to rise, Ethan went down the stairs, avoiding looking directly at Olivia. He took the car keys and left, without saying a word. Olivia didn't try to stop him, knowing that anything she said at that moment would be in vain. He needed space, and she needed to accept that. But the silence he left behind was almost unbearable. She felt small, lost in the emptiness of the room that was once a space of comfort. Ethan drove aimlessly for hours. He needed time, he needed to find a way to deal with all of this. He passed by places that brought back memories of happy times with Olivia, but instead of comfort, they only served to deepen the pain. He stopped at a coffee shop he used to frequent alone on days when he wanted to escape the world, ordering a strong coffee and sitting at a table away. There, in the silence of that small corner, he began to question himself. Olivia's betrayal, even if it wasn't physical as he initially feared, was an unbearable weight. But what if it was more than that? He still didn't know the extent of what she had hidden. Meanwhile, Olivia, alone at home, finally found the courage to face what she had been putting off for months. She picked up the phone, hesitated for a moment, and then dialed the number she had been avoiding. The voice on the other end answered with a tone of familiarity that made her shiver. They spoke briefly, but Olivia was firm that she needed to wrap things up. It was time to face what had caused it. The man on the other side insisted, tried to convince her that they could find a solution together, but Olivia knew it was too late. She ended the call, feeling the weight of yet another difficult but necessary choice. When Ethan returned home, it was already late. He found Olivia in the kitchen, a cup of tea forgotten on the table as she stared blankly at the floor. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then, Ethan broke the silence. "Did you talk to him?" he asked, and Olivia just nodded, without looking up. "And what did he say?" he continued, his voice thick with tiredness. Olivia finally lifted her head, her eyes showing the vulnerability she felt. "He thinks we can fix this, but I said no. I said I needed to work things out with you, and only you." Ethan laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Settle things?" he repeated. "Do you really think you can work something out after all this? Olivia, you broke something that may never be fixed." He ran a hand through his hair, trying to control the emotions that threatened to boil over again. "I just wish you had trusted me. That you had told me from the beginning. But now I don't even know who you are." Olivia approached hesitantly, stopping a few feet away from him. "I'm the same person I've always been," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm the one who loves you, Ethan. That never changed." He stared at her, trying to find some truth in her words, but all he saw was the shadow of who she used to be. "Love is not hiding," he replied. "Love is being honest, even when it is difficult. And you failed at that." She had no answer. Instead, the tears began to flow silently as she pulled away, giving him the space he clearly desired. Ethan left the kitchen, going up to the bedroom again, but this time he didn't find the same suffocating silence. Instead, he felt overcome with a need to act. He opened his laptop and started writing, putting on paper everything he felt, everything that had happened. It wasn't for Olivia, or anyone in particular. It was for himself, an attempt to organize the thoughts that were consuming him. The following days were an exercise in painful coexistence. They avoided deep conversations, limiting themselves to necessary and short exchanges. Sophie noticed the tense atmosphere between her parents and, although she tried to act normally, it was obvious that the situation was affecting her. Ethan and Olivia knew they couldn't keep this up for long, but they were both caught up in their own internal battles. Ethan wondered if it was still possible to find a way back, while Olivia struggled with the guilt that consumed her. One quiet afternoon, Ethan decided he needed more answers. He sought out the man he now knew to be Olivia's half-brother, not to confront him, but to understand what else had been hidden. When the two met, Ethan felt a mixture of anger and curiosity. The man seemed uncomfortable but willing to talk. They talked at length, and Ethan discovered that there were more secrets buried in Olivia's past than he realized. But he also discovered something unexpected, the possibility that he himself needed to question what he really wanted from now on. The conversation didn't bring peace, but it did bring clarity. When Ethan returned home, he found Olivia waiting for him, as if she knew this moment would come. They sat in the room, facing each other, and finally began to talk, not as enemies, but as two people trying to find meaning in the chaos they both helped create. The words were difficult, and the path seemed even more difficult, but for the first time in a long time, there was honesty. Still, Ethan knew their future would depend on what came next. And he still didn't know if he was ready to decide. Ethan got up early that morning, after another bad night's sleep. The weight of what I had discovered, combined with the uncertainty of the future, seemed more oppressive every day. The house was silent, but it wasn't the comfortable silence it used to be. It was an emptiness that carried the unspoken words, the avoided confrontations, and the paths he knew he would need to choose. He walked down the stairs, feeling each step like a decision, each movement like an end point in something that once seemed eternal. Olivia was in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee, looking out the window. She looked smaller than ever, as if guilt had reduced everything she was. When Ethan entered, she glanced at him, not knowing if he would say something or just walk past. He picked up his own cup, filled it, and sat at the table, staring into the dark liquid as he tried to collect his thoughts. The stillness between them was cutting, but this time, it was Ethan who decided to break it. "I ran into him," he said, his voice emotionless. Olivia froze, as if expecting the impact of something she knew she couldn't control. "I needed to understand," he continued. "I needed to hear his version, to know what else you hid from me." She didn't respond right away, but her breath shook, as if his every word was a blow. Ethan looked up at her, searching for something to confirm or deny what he already knew. "He didn't lie about anything, Olivia. But the part that hurts the most is that you chose to lie to me." Olivia placed the cup on the table, crossing her arms in an instinctive gesture of defense. "I didn't know how to tell you," she began, but Ethan raised his hand, cutting her off. "It's not about how you told me. It's about the fact that you didn't tell. You had chances, time, and yet you chose to deal with this alone. This is not something that just goes away." He took a deep breath, running a hand over his face as if trying to dispel the fatigue that was consuming him. "I spent nights trying to find a way to continue, but the truth is, Olivia, we lost ourselves." She began to cry silently, but he offered no comfort. It was a painful contrast to the man he had been, always willing to protect her, to care for her. Now he seemed distant, unreachable. "Ethan, I don't want it to end like this," she said, her voice desperate. "I made a mistake, but I love you. I have always loved you." He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to find some truth in what she said. But all he felt was emptiness. "Sometimes love isn't enough," he replied, before getting up and leaving the kitchen. Over the next few weeks, the separation became inevitable. Ethan contacted lawyers, took steps to protect his finances, and began looking for a new place to live. Olivia, for her part, tried to continue with her routine, but it was clear that she was broken. Sophie, who had noticed the growing tension between her parents, now understood that things would never go back to the way they had been. She watched them sadly, trying to find a way to deal with the pain of watching her family fall apart. On a gray afternoon, Ethan picked Sophie up from school. As they drove back, she finally broke the silence she had maintained for so long. "Are you and Mommy going to be okay?" he asked, his voice small and full of uncertainty. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest, but tried to respond as honestly as possible. "I don't know, Sophie. But I promise we will do our best to make you okay." She nodded, looking out the window, but he knew those words weren't enough to ease what she felt. Olivia tried to redeem herself, but every gesture seemed too small, too late. She wrote a letter to Ethan, trying to explain her reasons, but he never opened it. To him, her actions had already spoken louder than any words she could write. She began attending therapy, trying to understand the choices that led her there, but guilt followed her like a constant shadow. Months passed, and Ethan finally found a new apartment. It was small but cozy, a space he could call his own. He began to build a new routine, focusing on his work and his relationship with Sophie. It was on a quiet afternoon, while walking through the park, that he met someone. A kind woman with a warm smile and a calm presence that made him feel something he thought he had lost forever, hope. Olivia, on the other hand, decided to start over differently. She sold the house where they had lived for so many moments, unable to bear the weight of the memories. He moved to a smaller place, focusing on his career and rebuilding his relationship with Sophie. Although the days were difficult, she knew she needed to move forward, even if regret accompanied her every step. In the end, each of them followed different paths, marked by the choices they made and the consequences they faced. Ethan found peace in a new life, while Olivia continued to struggle to find meaning amid the rubble of what she had lost. Sophie, although marked by her parents' separation, grew up knowing that true love needs trust and honesty to survive. If you made it this far, tell us what you thought of this story in the comments. We want to hear your opinion and know how you perceive these characters' dilemmas and decisions. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories like this. Here, we believe that each narrative brings a lesson, and we never support any type of betrayal. Until next time.